My name is Leo Vance. I'm 32 years old and I live in Phoenix, Arizona, a city of relentless sun, burning ambition and the kind of failures that leave a permanent mark. I am the firstborn son in a very wealthy family, one where the Vance name is practically synonymous with success. It's plastered across the opulent resorts and glittering casinos that light up the desert night. But if you were to ask any member of my family about me, they'd paint a very different picture. They would call me the disappointment, the black sheep of the entire lineage, the eldest son who fell short of every single expectation. And trust me, I've heard those sentiments enough times, both spoken and unspoken, that they feel permanently carved into my soul, like a scar that refuses to fade. I grew up in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, a home where every polished corner and vaulted ceiling was a testament to our family's immense fortune. My father, Marcus Vance, is a difficult man to be around, with a gaze that seems to look straight through you and a voice that can command absolute silence without ever being raised. He is the chairman of Vance Holdings, the corporate empire that owns a chain of resorts and casinos stretching across the entire state. My mother, Catherine, is a woman of impeccable refinement, always seen in expensive gowns with a flawless smile. Yet I've always recognized the deep disappointment in her eyes whenever she turns her attention to me. It's a fleeting but unmistakable shadow. Then there are Julian and Isabel, my younger siblings, who are the family's prized jewels, the ones who have always been cherished and implicitly trusted by our parents. Julian, who is 28, is a gifted lawyer with a confident smirk and a razor-sharp wit in every sentence he utters. Isabel, at just 26, is a celebrated interior designer who lands major contracts with five-star hotels. And then there's me. I'm the Leo who managed to graduate from a top-tier business school and still has absolutely nothing worthwhile to show for it. That crushing weight of expectation has been on my shoulders for as long as I can remember. As the firstborn son, it was always a given that I would one day take over my father's empire, that I would become a more polished, more effective version of him. I can still feel the tension of those family dinners, my father's intense gaze fixed on me as he would often declare, "Leo, the future of the Vance family rests on you. Do not disappoint me." But every time he'd say it, a cold knot would form in my stomach. I didn't want to be a carbon copy of my father. I was desperate to create something that was mine alone, a unique legacy, so that when people heard the name Leo Vance, they wouldn't immediately think, "Oh, Marcus Vance's son." I swear I gave it my all. In college, I wasn't just getting by. I was consistently at the top of my class, driven by a powerful dream of building my own business, something completely separate from the Vance name. Once I graduated, I poured all the passion of my youth into a series of startup ventures. My first attempt was a small coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, which I envisioned as a haven, a blend of an artistic space with live music. I spent months obsessing over every detail, from designing the menu and selecting the furniture to even painting the murals on the walls myself. But the dream collapsed in just 6 months. The doors shut for good due to a devastating lack of customers. After that, I threw myself into developing a tech app, a platform designed to connect street artists with tourists visiting the city. I sank thousands of dollars of my own money into the project, only to discover in the most painful way possible that the market simply wasn't interested in my idea. Following that disaster was a high-end fashion boutique where I had hoped to showcase unique, emerging designers. But once again, I fell flat on my face. The customers never came, and the venture wiped out nearly all of my personal savings. Each new failure brought a fresh wave of ridicule from my family. My father never had to say the words aloud. His cold, disappointed eyes communicated everything with brutal clarity. My mother, though gentler, would offer words that felt like their own kind of condemnation. "Leo, why don't you just consider working for your father's company?" She'd suggest softly. "It would be so much easier." Her tone made me feel like a toddler who couldn't manage to stay on his own 2 feet. Julian and Isabel, however, were far more direct with their contempt. During family get-togethers, Julian would inevitably find a way to mock me. "So, Leo," he'd start with a smirk, "what's the next grand venture you're launching? A cupcake shop, perhaps?" Isabel would then let out a little giggle and add, "Or maybe a film production company. Oh, I bet it'll be bankrupt in 3 months flat." They delivered these lines as if they were harmless jokes, but I wasn't naive. I knew that deep down, they genuinely saw me as nothing more than a complete and utter failure. And honestly, I don't entirely blame them. I can see why they think that way. While Julian and Isabel were collecting one success after another, Julian with his high-profile legal victories, Isabel with her designs being lauded in national magazines, I was just their clumsy older brother constantly tripping over my own grand ambitions. But that understanding didn't make their words hurt any less. Every single jab, every scornful glance felt like another twist of a knife digging deeper into what was left of my self-esteem. There were so many nights I'd just lie in bed in my small rented apartment on the edge of the city, staring blankly at the ceiling, wondering if I truly was as worthless as they all seemed to believe. Was that my destiny? Was I just born to be the dark backdrop that made everyone else's success shine brighter? Despite everything, a small, stubborn part of me still believed I could accomplish something meaningful. I refused to be a cog in my father's corporate machine, living my entire life in his massive shadow. I needed to stand on my own 2 feet to finally prove to all of them and to myself that I wasn't the failure they had all decided I was. I just wanted for once for them to look at me and have to admit that they had been wrong. Maybe it was just arrogance, or maybe it was pure stubbornness. But that desire was the only flame left inside me, the only thing that kept me pushing forward even when it felt like my entire world was crumbling. My apartment is a humble place, a world away from the opulent splendor of the family estate. It's got one small bedroom, a kitchen so cramped you can barely turn around, and a worn-out second-hand sofa I picked up at a thrift shop. But this place is my sanctuary. It's the one place where I can breathe, where I can just be myself without the constant draining comparisons to Julian or Isabel. I spend a lot of time just sitting by the window, gazing out at the distant twinkling lights of Phoenix, dreaming of the day I'll finally build something that makes this city take notice. But whenever I start mapping out a new project, that old, familiar fear of failure inevitably slithers back in, whispering its poison right into my ear. "You're just going to fail again, Leo. You're not good enough." I've thought about giving up more times than I can count. I really have. I remember one night vividly right after my tech app had completely imploded. I was just sitting in my tiny home office, staring at the glowing red numbers on my computer screen, the figures screaming my losses back at me. I thought, maybe my parents are right. Maybe I should just surrender my dreams, accept a position at my father's company, and settle into a safe, predictable, and soul-crushing life. But every single time that thought starts to take hold, a primal part of me screams in fierce protest. I just can't bring myself to live a life I don't believe in. I am determined to rise on my own, no matter how grueling the journey might be. My family wasn't always this cold and distant. I can still recall moments from my childhood when I felt genuinely loved. There were evenings when my father would take just me to a baseball game, and on the drive he'd tell me stories about the early, scrappy days of building Vance Holdings from absolutely nothing. My mother used to sit with me for hours, reading me fairy tales and whispering that I could be anything I wanted to be. But as I got older and my failures began to accumulate, That warmth slowly evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of their expectations and the sting of their sharp criticism. Phoenix, with all its dazzling beauty, is a strange place to come of age. This city is a magnet for dreamers, people from all over who are chasing something bigger, but it's also littered with the wreckage of those dreams. I've watched countless people arrive here with stars in their eyes, hoping to completely reinvent their lives, only to see them leave with nothing but empty pockets and broken spirits. I am terrified of becoming one of them, but with every new failure I feel myself slipping closer and closer to that exact fate. And then, on a completely ordinary day, a phone call from a guy named Kevin changed everything. Kevin was someone I'd met after college. We weren't exactly best friends. Our interactions were mostly limited to grabbing a coffee to talk about potential business deals. He called late one afternoon just as I was sitting on my worn-out sofa, staring at an overdue electric bill I had no idea how to pay. His voice crackled over the phone, absolutely buzzing with an excitement so intense it felt like he'd just hit the lottery. "Leo, I have something for you," he said, the words tumbling out in a quick, urgent rush. "A real opportunity. You have to hear this." I let out a long sigh, the weight of my latest failure still heavy on my shoulders, and answered him with a complete lack of enthusiasm. "Kevin, if this is another one of your harebrained schemes like that time you wanted me to invest in a mobile taco truck, then I'm not interested." I was painfully familiar with Kevin's brand of pipe dreams, which almost always concluded with him walking away with a hefty commission while I was left holding the bag of losses. No, this is completely different," Kevin insisted, letting out a loud, booming laugh. "I'm talking about real estate. There's an old, defunct gas station on the outskirts of town right near Highway 60. It's going for dirt cheap, only $20,000. Can you even believe it? It's an absolute steal." I slowly sat up a little straighter on the couch, not exactly filled with excitement, but my curiosity was definitely piqued. A gas station? In the middle of nowhere? Kevin, what kind of person buys an abandoned gas station in a place that even the javelinas avoid? "That's precisely the point, Leo." Kevin's voice became as smooth and persuasive as a seasoned car salesman's. "The state is planning to build a new freeway that's going to cut right through that area. I got a tip from an inside source I trust. A major real estate conglomerate is already sniffing around that land. They're talking about putting up a massive resort, maybe even a luxury shopping center. That old gas station will be sitting right in the heart of all of it. If you buy it now, do a few minor repairs, you could flip it for 10 times what you paid. Or you could run it yourself and turn it into a legitimate gold mine." I fell silent for a long moment, my mind racing to process what he'd just laid out. Kevin had a natural talent for making every single proposition sound like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but I knew from experience that he wasn't someone you could completely trust. He worked as a broker, but he wasn't the kind of honest, straightforward professional you'd want to do business with. He was a tall guy with slicked-back hair, a smile that could charm anyone, and a wardrobe of cheap suits that were expertly tailored to look far more expensive than they actually were. "Kevin, I don't have $20,000, I said, the weariness evident in my voice. "My bank account is overdrawn and I still haven't paid this month's rent." "Then borrow it," Kevin shot back instantly, as if the solution were the most obvious thing in the world. "Leo, you're a Vance. Your family has more money than they know what to do with. Just ask your parents or your siblings. This is your chance to prove you're not." He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. "Well, you know what they say about you." I felt a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. Kevin was well aware of how my family mocked me, and he clearly had no problem using that knowledge to manipulate me. "Don't you dare bring my family into this," I snapped, my voice sharp. "I'm not going to them for money. You know exactly what they think of me." All right, take it easy," Kevin said in a soothing tone, but I could practically see the smug smirk on his face through the phone. But listen, Leo, I'm doing this as a favor to you. I could sell this gas station to a dozen other people, but I want you to have this opportunity. 20 grand is a ridiculously good deal. I worked my magic with the landowner to get the price down this low. They're desperate to sell fast, and I'm holding it for you, but you need to make a decision quickly, or they're going to move on to the next buyer. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force my brain to think clearly. An abandoned gas station in the middle of the desert sounded like the definition of a crazy idea. It was exactly the kind of thing my family would laugh about for years. But Kevin's words about the new freeway and the massive real estate projects had planted a seed of hope. I had failed so many times, and the mere thought of a real chance to finally turn my life around, to prove once and for all that I wasn't a loser, made my heart pound in my chest. But $20,000. At that moment, it might as well have been $1 million. Let me think about it, I mumbled. There's no time, Leo, Kevin replied, his voice taking on an even more urgent edge. I'm not kidding, there's another buyer already asking about it. I'm only giving you first dibs because we're friends. You've got 48 hours. Call me back when you've made up your mind, okay? The line went dead, and I just sat there in the silence, staring down at my phone. One part of me screamed to call him back that very second and shut it down. But another part, the one that was so desperate to prove my worth, couldn't stop replaying the possibilities in my head. A gas station, an opportunity, a chance to finally stand tall in front of my family and say, I did it. That night, sleep was impossible. I paced back and forth across the worn floor of my tiny apartment, my mind a chaotic swirl of numbers, risks, and potential rewards. I didn't have $20,000, not even close, but I knew I could probably borrow it. I had a couple of wealthy friends who could write a check for that amount without even blinking. But the thing that gave me the most pause wasn't the money. It was Kevin. I knew he was a slick operator, and his words, no matter how convincing, were hard to swallow without a heavy dose of skepticism. The next morning, I made a decision. I had to see the place for myself. Kevin agreed to meet me at a small cafe before we drove out to the site. When I walked in, he was already settled into a booth, looking sharp in a gray suit, sipping an espresso while scrolling on his phone. "Leo, you made it!" he exclaimed with a wide grin, jumping up to clap me on the shoulder. "I had a feeling you wouldn't pass this up." During the long drive out to the gas station, Kevin was a non-stop hype machine. He went on and on about the new freeway, the big-shot investors pouring money into the area, and how this dilapidated gas station was a diamond in the rough that I could easily polish into a fortune. But the moment we pulled up, my heart plummeted. The gas station was situated on a desolate, dusty road, miles from the vibrant heart of Phoenix. It didn't look like a diamond in the rough. It looked like a ruin. The fuel pumps were covered in a thick layer of rust. The windows of the small convenience store were completely shattered, and the roof sagged so badly it looked like a strong gust of wind could bring the whole thing down. Weeds had run wild, choking everything, and an old faded sign that read Canyon Oasis hung precariously from a single hinge, its letters barely legible. This wasn't a diamond in the rough. It was a pile of garbage. "Kevin, are you being serious right now?" I turned to face him, struggling to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "You think this is worth $20,000? Kevin just laughed, but I saw his eyes flicker away for a split second. "Leo, you're not seeing the bigger picture. You have to look past the surface. Don't you see the potential here? Once that freeway is built, this spot is going to be the epicenter of everything. All it needs is a little investment to fix it up, and you'll be sitting on a gold mine." "Kevin, be straight with me," I pushed, my patience wearing thin. "Are you positive this is a good deal? Or are you just trying to lock down your commission?" He placed a hand over his heart, feigning a look of deep offense. "Leo, it hurts me that you think I'm that kind of guy. I'm your friend. I'm giving you this opportunity. The original asking price was $30,000. I fought tooth and nail with the landowner to get it down to 20 for you. He's in a hurry to sell, and I'm the one who secured this price for you." I desperately wanted to believe him, I really did, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The way his words tumbled out just a little too fast, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. It all set my internal alarms ringing. But then my mind drifted to my family. I pictured their mocking smiles, my father's disappointed stare. I replayed all my past failures one after another, and this opportunity, as insane as it seemed, might just be the one wild gamble that could finally let me win big and prove them all wrong. It took me 2 frantic days to pull the money together. I ended up borrowing most of it from an old college friend, swearing I'd pay him back with interest as soon as I could. I also had to take out a small, high-interest loan against my apartment. Finally, I had the $20,000 in hand. I called Kevin and told him I was in. "Incredible!" Kevin shouted into the phone, his voice echoing with triumph. "You will not regret this, Leo. I'm telling you, this is the turning point you've been waiting for." The sale was finalized with unnerving speed. Kevin escorted me to a real estate lawyer's office downtown, where the lawyer himself seemed distracted and impatient, barely asking any questions. I hastily signed the stack of papers, handed over the cashier's check, and was given a rusty set of keys to the gas station. As I held them in my palm, a strange cocktail of exhilaration and terror washed over me. This was it. This was the first time in my life I owned something that was completely and totally mine, but that flicker of joy was short-lived. A few days later, during a rare family dinner that I had been practically forced to attend, I told them about my new venture. Their reactions were precisely what I had braced myself for. My father let out a short, harsh, mocking laugh. "An abandoned gas station? Leo, are you serious? What ridiculous scheme have you thrown your money away on this time?" My mother attempted a gentler approach, but her voice was laced with undisguised disappointment. "Leo, darling, you really should just accept a position at your father's company. Why must you insist on chasing these foolish ideas?" Julian, true to form, didn't miss the opportunity to twist the knife. "Leo, I'll bet that gas station becomes the official graveyard of your career. You should call it Leo's Last Stand." Isabel let out a little giggle, adding, "I'll even design a grand opening sign for you, completely free of charge." I sat there in silence, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork and knife, fighting to keep my rage from boiling over. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them that one day I would make them eat their words. Instead, I remained silent, forcing down the bitter taste of my anger. I made a quiet vow to myself. I would succeed. A few days after that disastrous dinner, I drove out to the gas station with a toolbox rattling in the back of my car and a fragile sliver of hope in my chest. As I unlocked the door and stepped into the convenience store, the thick, musty smell of dust and mildew assaulted my senses. I looked around at the barren shelves, the spiderweb of cracks spreading across the walls, and a cold, creeping sense of dread began to take hold. I paid $20,000 for this. For the first time, I began to seriously question whether Kevin had been telling me the truth about its value. Weeks later, the devastating truth finally came out. A friend of mine who works in commercial real estate did some digging for me and revealed that the gas station had been on the market for just $3,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. $3,000. That was before Kevin had supposedly helped me negotiate, before he had masterfully manipulated the numbers and watched me sign the papers with that fake, reassuring smile plastered on his face. The entire negotiation had been a complete fabrication. Kevin had artificially inflated the price by an obscene amount, pocketing the massive difference and shamelessly exploiting my desperation. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. The person I thought was looking out for me, the one who claimed to be my friend, was nothing but a common con artist. I stood there in the middle of the Canyon Oasis convenience store, my hand shaking as I gripped my phone. I dialed Kevin's number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again and then again, each unanswered ring feeling like another twist of the knife in my already wounded pride. Kevin never picked up. He had vanished like a ghost into the vast Arizona desert, leaving me stranded with this worthless wreck and a heart shattered by deceit. I just stood there, surrounded by the smell of dust and stale motor oil, my mind reeling. This was it. I was stuck with this pile of junk that I had paid a fortune for. I couldn't stop thinking about how incredibly foolish I'd been to trust Kevin. He had seen my weakness so clearly, my raw desperation to prove myself, my paralyzing fear of my family's scorn. He knew exactly how badly I craved a win, and he had used that knowledge to play me for a fool. I replayed our conversations in my head, the times he had laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, called me his friend. It was all a performance. I had allowed him to manipulate me like a marionette on a string, and now I was stuck paying the price for my own gullibility. I stared out through a grimy, cracked window, seriously contemplating just giving up. I could sell this place for pennies on the dollar, whatever I could get for it, and crawl back to Phoenix. I could swallow my pride and beg my father for a job at his company. At least then I wouldn't have to worry about rent or bills anymore. But the moment I pictured my father's icy stare, Julian's smug smile, and Isabel's condescending little laugh, a new resolve hardened inside me. If I gave up now, I would be handing them a reason to laugh at me for the rest of my life. I would have absolutely no dignity left. I pushed myself to my feet, wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand, and took a long, hard look at the wreckage surrounding me. Even if Kevin had scammed me, even if I had made a catastrophic mistake, I knew in my gut that I couldn't quit. Canyon Oasis was my last stand, my final chance, and I was going to have to fight for it until the bitter end. The days that followed blurred into a grueling marathon of pure, back-breaking labor. I started with the convenience store, where thick layers of dust and cobwebs had laid claim to every single corner. The empty shelves, caked in a thick layer of grime, looked like forgotten relics from a distant past. I drove to the nearest town and bought a cheap broom, a bucket, and a handful of cleaning supplies. I scrubbed the filthy floors, carefully swept up the shards of broken glass, and tried to patch the holes in the leaking roof with some scrap metal sheets I found. Every aggressive sweep of the broom, every drop of my sweat that splattered onto the grimy floor felt like a small act of defiance, a declaration of war against the doubts that were relentlessly gnawing at my insides. The Canyon Oasis gas station, living up to its name, stood completely isolated in the vast expanse of the Arizona desert. Highway 60, which ran right past it, was mostly empty and desolate, with only the occasional semi-truck thundering by, kicking up a massive cloud of dust in its wake. A new, terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. What if Kevin had lied about the new freeway too? The possibility that I had been deceived not just about the price but about the entire future potential of the land sent a cold shiver down my spine. But every single time that paralyzing doubt started to creep in, I would force myself to push it away. "You've come this far, Leo," I'd repeat to myself like a mantra. "You can't turn back now." I channeled all my energy into fixing things, one small, manageable piece at a time. The gas pumps were completely shot, their internal pipes rusted beyond any hope of repair. I didn't have the money for new ones, so I drove to a nearby junkyard, bought some used parts for next to nothing, and taught myself how to fix the pumps by watching hours of instructional videos online. I had never been a mechanic, not even close, but desperation made me a fast learner. There were days I worked from sunrise until well after midnight, my hands and arms covered in a layer of grease and a network of fresh cuts and scratches. But I refused to stop. Every small victory, a pump finally humming back to life, a single light bulb flickering on inside the store, felt like I was slowly but surely reclaiming a tiny piece of the self-respect that had been stolen from me. Then one sweltering afternoon, while I was on my back, wrestling with a stubborn, leaking water pipe beneath the store's floorboards, everything changed. That damn pipe had been the bane of my existence for a solid week. Water was constantly seeping out, turning one corner of the floor into a muddy mess, and I certainly couldn't afford to call a professional plumber. I had decided to tackle it myself despite having zero knowledge of plumbing. Armed with a rusty wrench and a small trowel, I started digging through the floor. Breaking apart the old cracked concrete was grueling work. I had to put every ounce of my strength into chipping away at it. Sweat poured down my face and a thick layer of dust clung to my clothes, but I refused to stop. I had to fix that pipe, or the entire store was going to end up as a swamp. After what felt like hours of relentless digging, I heard a strange sound. Not the familiar crack of concrete, but a sharp, metallic clank, as if my trowel had struck something solid. I froze, panting heavily, and looked down into the hole I'd created. Beneath the shattered concrete, I could see a wooden panel, ancient and darkened with age, completely different from the rest of the flooring. It looked almost like a small trapdoor built right into the foundation of the building. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. What in the world was this? A trapdoor? Some kind of secret storage compartment? Or was it just a forgotten piece of wood left to rot under the floor? I dropped to my knees, frantically brushing away the dust and debris with my bare hands. The wood was held in place by rusted nails which had been loosened by decades of neglect. I grabbed my wrench and started prying them out one by one, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. When I finally lifted the heavy wooden panel, I was met with a dark, gaping void below. It was a passageway, deep and cold, leading down into absolute darkness. A damp, cool breeze wafted up, carrying the distinct scent of old wood and something else. Something that smelled remarkably like aged wine. I quickly switched on my phone's flashlight, and its weak beam revealed a rickety wooden staircase that looked like it might disintegrate under the slightest pressure. I stood there for a long moment, hesitating. A sensible part of my brain was screaming at me to just put the panel back, finish fixing the damn pipe, and pretend I'd never seen any of this. But another part of me, the curious part, the part that was starving for something, anything, unexpected, was urging me to go down. The stairs groaned and creaked ominously with each careful step, and I clung to the splintered wooden railing, terrified of falling through. When my feet finally touched the solid ground at the bottom, I raised my flashlight, and the sight that greeted me made me freeze in place. The cellar wasn't huge, maybe a couple hundred square feet, but it was absolutely crammed with old wooden crates and sturdy iron shelves lined with hundreds and hundreds of wine bottles, all of them blanketed in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Some of the bottles were resting horizontally on the shelves, while others were carefully stacked in large wooden crates, as if someone had meticulously stored them here and then simply abandoned them. The labels on the bottles were so faded and worn that they were nearly impossible to read, but I could still make out a few of the names. The smudged, old-fashioned script hinted at names that carried an unmistakable air of prestige. Chateau Margaux, Romanée Conti, Screaming Eagle. My heart started to pound even faster as the beam of my flashlight swept across the rows of bottles, each one placed with such care like a priceless treasure. This wasn't just a storage room for old junk, it was a forgotten vault, a treasure trove of riches buried beneath the dust of decades. I moved with extreme caution, as if I was afraid a single sudden movement might shatter something irreplaceable. I knelt down, gently picked up one of the bottles, and carefully wiped away the thick layer of dust from its label. Under the faint, flickering glow of my phone's light, I could just make out the words, Chateau Margaux, 1900. I was no wine expert, but I knew enough to realize that this was not just some ordinary bottle of wine. My hand was trembling as I carefully set the bottle back down. What was all this? How could a collection of wine like this possibly be hidden beneath the floor of a derelict gas station in the middle of the Arizona desert? I swept my flashlight beam across the entire cellar, doing a rough count. There had to be hundreds of bottles, and that wasn't even counting the contents of the large wooden crates stacked in the corner. Some of those crates had inscriptions carved into their sides, but I couldn't decipher them in the dim light. I felt like I had stumbled into the middle of a mystery, a story that had been buried and forgotten long ago. I sat down on the cold, dusty floor of the cellar, trying to get my racing thoughts in order. This gas station had clearly been abandoned for decades, long before Kevin had ever conned me into buying it. A thought struck me. Maybe it had been forgotten since the Prohibition era back in the 1920s, when the production and sale of alcohol were illegal. I'd read about that period in history books, bootleggers running clandestine operations, hiding their valuable stashes of wine and liquor in secret underground cellars to avoid the law. Could this be one of those hidden caches? A place where smugglers had stashed their premium wines, only to never return for some unknown reason. I pushed myself back to my feet, a new sense of determination surging through me. I had to investigate further. I carefully dragged one of the heavy wooden crates out from the stack, the old wood groaning in protest. Inside were even more bottles, some of them still sealed with a vibrant red wax, looking as if they had just been bottled yesterday. I picked up another bottle, this one a Romanée Conti, the label clearly reading 1929. I had heard my father boast about attending auctions in Phoenix where obsessive collectors would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single, exceptionally rare bottle. If every bottle in this cellar was worth even a fraction of that, the entire collection could be worth tens of millions. But just as that electrifying thought sparked in my mind, a familiar wave of doubt washed over me, yanking me back to the harsh reality of my life. I was Leo Vance, the family failure, the one who always managed to trip and fall whenever an opportunity got within arm's reach. Was this just another cruel illusion? Were these bottles truly valuable? Or were they just clever fakes abandoned here precisely because they were worthless? I didn't have nearly enough knowledge about wine to make that judgment myself, and the thought that I might just be deluding myself again sent a cold chill through my entire body. But I couldn't just dismiss the possibility. I climbed back up the creaking stairs to the convenience store and grabbed an old, grease-stained notebook from my tool bag. I went back down and started taking meticulous notes, carefully counting the bottles and crates and jotting down every label I could decipher. My hand was shaking as I wrote, not from the cellar's chill, but from an overwhelming mix of pure, unadulterated excitement and paralyzing fear. I had no idea what my next move should be, but I knew one thing for certain. I needed someone with real expertise to verify what I had found. That night, I carefully transported a few of the bottles back to my apartment, placing them on my small kitchen table with the reverence one would reserve for priceless jewels. I opened my laptop and plunged into a deep dive, researching vintage wines, the Prohibition era in Arizona, and the current market value of bottles like Chateau Margaux and Romanée Conti. What I discovered made my head spin. A single bottle of Chateau Margaux 1900 had recently sold for over $175,000 at an auction in London. A Romanée Conti from 1929, if it was in good condition, could easily command a price of over $90,000. And I didn't just have one or two of these bottles. I had hundreds, possibly even thousands, sitting in that cellar. If even a small fraction of them were authentic, the entire collection could be worth an astronomical amount of money. I just sat there staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, feeling like the entire room was tilting around me. This was it. This was the opportunity I had been dreaming of my entire life. It was an unimaginable, life-altering miracle. But right alongside the surging wave of excitement, a new and familiar fear began to creep in. Was I actually capable of handling something this big? Or was I destined to screw it up, just like I had with every other chance I'd ever been given? I shut the laptop, stood up, and began to pace the length of my cramped apartment, my mind racing. I needed a strategy. I couldn't just show up at an auction house with a trunk full of dusty wine bottles without knowing for sure if they were real. I needed to find a genuine expert, but how could I possibly contact someone without revealing my incredible secret? I had learned a very painful lesson from Kevin. Blindly trusting the wrong person could cost me everything. I decided then and there to keep this discovery completely to myself, at least until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, I drove back out to Canyon Oasis with a completely transformed mindset. The cellar was no longer just a damp, dilapidated hole in the ground. It was a potential treasure chest, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to completely rewrite my future. I spent the entire day down in that cellar, meticulously inspecting every bottle, every crate. A few of the bottles were broken, their precious contents long since evaporated, but the vast majority were perfectly intact, their red wax seals still firm and unbroken. While I was carefully examining a crate tucked away in a dark corner of the cellar, I discovered something else. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover soft and rotting with age, wedged between two of the larger crates. I opened it with extreme care, the yellowed, fragile pages threatening to crumble in my hands. Inside were handwritten notes detailing transactions, dates, the quantities of bottles, and a list of what appeared to be recipients' names. It was then that I realized this gas station had most likely been a central hub in a sophisticated bootlegging network a long, long time ago. I could almost picture it. Men in long coats and fedoras driving old rumbling trucks under the cover of darkness, hiding their valuable bottles beneath the floorboards and stashing crates in this very cellar. Canyon Oasis wasn't just a gas station. It was a living piece of history, a forgotten fragment of a chaotic and mysterious time. I knew I had to contact a wine expert, but I was determined to do it with the utmost discretion. I went online and found an auction house in Phoenix that specialized in rare and vintage wines. I composed a careful, vague email, not revealing any of the specific details, only stating that I had come into possession of a few old bottles and was interested in having them appraised. The man who replied had a deep professional voice. He agreed to meet with me in a few days, but requested that I bring a few of the bottles to his office for an initial assessment. I hesitated. Removing the bottles from the safety of the cellar meant risking exposure, but I had no other choice. I needed an expert opinion. I carefully selected 3 bottles, the Chateau Margaux 1900, the Romanée Conti 1929, and another with a simple handwritten label, and packed them with extreme care into a small wooden box I had found in the cellar. As I drove away from the gas station, I felt like I was transporting a live bomb. Every time my old car hit a pothole on Highway 60, I winced, consumed by a visceral fear that the precious bottles would shatter. I drove agonizingly slowly, my eyes glued to the road, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The meeting with the wine expert was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the auction house's office in downtown Phoenix. I walked in, clutching the small wooden box to my chest, feeling as though every single person in the room was staring at me. The man I met was named Mr. David Sterling, a renowned wine expert with silver hair and elegant gold-rimmed glasses. He had a piercing gaze, the kind that made you feel as though he could appraise your entire life story with a single glance. I placed the box on his polished mahogany desk, trying to keep my voice from shaking as I explained that I had stumbled upon a few old bottles in a property I had recently acquired. I was careful not to mention Canyon Oasis or the secret cellar. I didn't want anyone to know too much, not yet. Mr. Sterling opened the box, his movements deliberate and precise. He carefully lifted out each bottle, examining the labels and seals under the bright light of his desk lamp. His face remained a mask of professional neutrality, but I thought I saw his hand tremble ever so slightly as he held the Chateau Margaux 1900. "You say you just found these bottles in a property?" he asked, his voice low and tinged with a healthy dose of skepticism. I just nodded, doing my best to maintain a casual expression, even though my heart was now pounding like a drum solo against my ribs. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Sterling finally sat back down, removed his glasses, and looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Vance," he began, "I don't know where you acquired these bottles, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that they are genuine, and they are extraordinarily rare. A Chateau Margaux from 1900, if it's in good condition, could easily fetch upwards of $175,000 at auction. The Romanée Conti 1929 is no less impressive. I would estimate its value to be somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000. As for this one with the handwritten label," he paused, picking it up to inspect it more closely, "I would need to do further verification, but my initial assessment is that it could be part of a special private batch from the Prohibition era. If you have more bottles like these, you are sitting on a veritable treasure." I felt a dizzying rush of blood to my head, as if the entire world was tilting on its axis. "You're saying, how much?" I stammered, my brain struggling to process the staggering numbers he was throwing around. "These 3 bottles alone could bring in several $100,000, Mr. Sterling said, his tone as calm and matter-of-fact as if he were discussing the weather. "But if you have more, a substantial collection, the total value could easily reach into the millions. How many more of these bottles do you have?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to blurt out the truth, to tell him that I had hundreds of bottles, dozens of crates filled with them. But the fresh, stinging memory of Kevin's betrayal made me hold my tongue. "I'm not entirely sure," I replied, keeping my tone deliberately vague. "I'll have to check again, but can you help me with the appraisal and the sale?" Mr. Sterling smiled for the first time since I had walked into his office. "Of course, Mr. Vance, that's what we do, but I will need to see the entire collection, and we will need to handle this properly. Verification, appraisal, and then organizing a special auction. If you agree to consign with us, I can begin reaching out to some of our international collectors. They will pay top dollar for bottles of this caliber." I walked out of that office feeling both completely exhilarated and deeply anxious. Mr. Sterling had agreed to keep the information confidential, but I knew that in a city like Phoenix, a rumor this big wouldn't stay secret for long. I drove straight back to Canyon Oasis that afternoon, double-checked the flimsy lock on the front door, and started to formulate a plan. My first priority was to secure the wine collection. I needed to hire a security team, install cameras, and reinforce the cellar entrance. But I didn't have the money for any of that. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, I worked with a frantic, tireless energy. I continued to meet with Mr. Sterling, bringing him a few more bottles at a time for verification. He confirmed that the vast majority of them were in excellent, perfectly preserved condition. His initial conservative estimate of the entire stash's value was a mind-boggling $50 million, and he stressed that it could potentially be much more. That number left me in a state of shock. I, Leo Vance, the one my own family called the shame of their lineage, was sitting on a treasure that was about to change my entire life. I decided to start small. We would hold a preliminary auction, selling just 10 of the bottles to test the market and, more importantly, to raise some initial capital. Mr. Sterling organized the event at a luxurious Phoenix resort, inviting a hand-picked group of wealthy collectors from all over the world. I stood awkwardly in the back corner of the grand ballroom wearing a suit I had to borrow from a friend, feeling completely out of place among the impeccably dressed men and women in their designer attire. When the Chateau Margaux 1900 was brought to the auction block, the bidding started at $100,000. Less than 10 minutes later, the hammer came down at $185,000. In total, those first 10 bottles brought in over $1.3 million. I could barely process what I was seeing as I stared at the final figures on the contract. With the money from that first auction, I began the process of transforming Canyon Oasis into something much greater. The very first thing I did was pay off all my debts, the loan from my college friend, the second mortgage on my apartment, and the mountain of unpaid bills that had been piling up on my kitchen counter. Then I hired a professional security firm to guard the gas station 24/7, installing state-of-the-art cameras and a sophisticated alarm system to protect the priceless contents of the cellar. I had the leaking roof completely replaced, installed brand new modern gas pumps, and renovated the old convenience store, turning it into a sleek modern space with a high-end wine tasting counter as its centerpiece. I carefully selected a few of the more interesting bottles from the cellar and displayed them in elegant, climate-controlled glass cases, creating a small, curated museum that told the story of the Prohibition era. Each bottle was a tangible piece of history, and I wanted every customer who walked through the door to feel that. Over the next 6 months, I worked closely with Mr. Sterling, organizing 3 more auctions. In total, I earned over $30 million from those sales, a number so vast that it left me feeling dizzy every single time I checked my bank account. With a portion of that money, I started buying up the land surrounding Canyon Oasis, acting on the one piece of information Kevin had given me that turned out to be true: the new freeway. In early 2023, the construction crews broke ground, and just as he had predicted, investors started sniffing around the area. I began to dream bigger. I didn't just want a gas station. I envisioned a small boutique resort, a unique destination where travelers could stop, savor exquisite wine, and learn the incredible story of the desert's hidden treasure. But just as Canyon Oasis was beginning to truly shine, a new and perhaps more difficult challenge emerged. My family. The news about my incredible wine discovery couldn't stay a secret forever, and it wasn't long before they found out. Their reactions were a predictable and toxic cocktail of shock, raw envy, and a clumsy, belated attempt to insert themselves into my newfound success. I had known they would eventually reach out, but I hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, or in a way that would leave me feeling both completely heartbroken and incandescent with rage. My mother was the first to call. It was late one evening while I was outside inspecting the newly installed gas pumps. Her voice on the other end of the line was trembling, a stark and unsettling contrast to her usual cool, sarcastic tone. "Leo, I heard about the wine. About Canyon Oasis, is it true? Did you really find all of that?" I stood there in the brightly lit convenience store, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, feeling all the old familiar anger bubble up to the surface. "Yes, Mom, it's true. I did it." "Oh, Leo, I'm just so proud of you," she said. But I could hear the artificial strain in her voice, as if she were an actress playing a role she hadn't had time to rehearse. "Your father wants to see you. We need to talk about this." A treasure of that magnitude. You're going to need support. Vance Holdings can help you manage it. We could bring Canyon Oasis into the family's resort network. I let out a short, humorless laugh, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Mom, so now the family wants to help? After all of you called this place the graveyard of my career? After you, Dad, Julian, and Isabel mocked me every single time I tried to build something for myself? Leo, don't say that, she replied, her voice rising in pitch as if I had struck a raw nerve. We were just worried about you. Your father feels this is a wonderful opportunity for the family to finally work together. You shouldn't have to do this all alone. I ended the call right then, unwilling to listen to another word of it. My mother's words weren't an offer of support, they were a blatant attempt to seize control, to drag me and my success back under the suffocating shadow of Vance Holdings. They weren't there when I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the filthy floors, or when I was wrestling with rusted pipes in the dark, or when I was lying awake all night consumed with worry and fear. But now that I had finally succeeded, they wanted to claim a piece of it for themselves. The betrayal stung, but more than that, I had a sudden crystal-clear realization. I didn't need them anymore. Canyon Oasis was mine, and I would not let anyone take it away from me. Julian and Isabel reached out soon after, but not, of course, to apologize. Julian sent a long, condescending text beginning with a hollow congratulations. Leo, who would have ever thought you'd get this lucky? A multi-million-dollar wine collection. But you need to be careful. Managing that kind of money isn't as easy as it looks. If you want, we can sit down and talk about smart investments. I read the message, feeling the heat rise in my face. Lucky? He actually thought this was all just dumb luck. I didn't even bother to reply, I just deleted the message. Isabel called a few days later, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Leo, I hear Canyon Oasis is becoming a big deal. I could help you redesign the store, make it more upscale. I know some fantastic contractors, and of course I'd give you the family discount. I shut her down immediately, my tone icy. I didn't need their help, not when it was so transparently tied to their own selfish motives. The final confrontation was with my father. He summoned me to his office at the Vance Holdings headquarters, a building I had avoided for years like the plague. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his enormous, imposing desk. His gaze was no longer just cold. It was now tinged with a strange mix of curiosity and a grudging, reluctant respect. Leo, he said, his voice unusually low, I was wrong to doubt you. This wine collection, it's a miracle. But you need to understand, something of this magnitude is beyond your capabilities. Let Vance Holdings help you manage it. We have the resources, the experience. I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel small or insignificant in his presence. Thank you, Dad, but I can handle it. Canyon Oasis is mine, and I'm going to keep it that way. He fell silent, giving a slow, single nod, but I could tell he was not pleased. In his world, everything of value had to belong to the family, to the Vance name. But this time was different. I wasn't the little boy desperately trying to win his approval anymore. I was Leo Vance, the man who had turned an abandoned, worthless gas station into a miracle, and I was not going to let anyone take that away from me. In the months that followed, I poured every ounce of my being into expanding Canyon Oasis. With over $30 million from the wine auctions, I had more than enough capital to get the project started, but I knew that to truly turn my dream into a reality, I would need a strategic partner. I briefly entertained the idea of working with Vance Holdings, my father's company, but that thought was extinguished almost as quickly as it appeared. I knew my father. He didn't want a true partnership. He wanted control. He wanted to absorb Canyon Oasis into the family's corporate empire. a move that would once again reduce me to a mere shadow living under the Vance name. I could not, would not, let that happen. After a lifetime of being mocked and doubted, I was determined to stand on my own 2 feet, to prove, once and for all, that I could succeed without relying on my family. Instead, I reached out to a company called Arizona Ascend, a major real estate and entertainment conglomerate, and a direct competitor to Vance Holdings. Arizona Ascend was known for its bold, innovative projects in Phoenix, from luxurious resorts to cutting-edge casinos. I arranged a meeting with their CEO, Ms. Elena Ramirez, in mid-2023 at an upscale restaurant in downtown Phoenix. Ms. Ramirez was a formidable woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that was simultaneously friendly and intensely calculating. I laid out my entire vision for her. A comprehensive entertainment complex at Canyon Oasis featuring a fine dining restaurant with a world-class wine program, a boutique, desert-themed hotel, and a small intimate casino designed with a Prohibition-era theme, drawing inspiration from the incredible story of my wine discovery. "Leo, I have to say I'm impressed," Ms. Ramirez said after I finished, taking a slow sip of her wine. "Your story, going from an abandoned gas station to a multi-million-dollar treasure, is the kind of narrative that customers will absolutely love. And Canyon Oasis's location, right on the path of the new freeway, is a golden opportunity. We are very interested in partnering with you, but are you certain you want to take this path? I hear your father was not pleased when you turned down Vance Holdings." I managed a smile, trying to hide the flicker of tension that her words caused. "Ms. Ramirez, I have a great deal of respect for my father, but Canyon Oasis is mine, and I am going to build it my way." Ms. Ramirez nodded, a look of approval in her eyes. "I understand completely. We will provide the necessary support with funding, design, and operations, but you will be the one leading this project. This is your vision, Leo." The deal was signed a week later. Arizona Ascend invested $20 million, which I combined with $10 million of my own money, to begin construction on the Canyon Oasis Entertainment Complex. Throughout the entire construction process, I worked 16-hour days fueled by a relentless energy I never knew I possessed. Every single brick that was laid, every light fixture that was installed felt like another step toward proving to the world and to myself that I was more than just the failure of the Vance family. I was building something that was truly my own, a legacy that no one could ever take away from me. In June of 2024, the Canyon Oasis Entertainment Complex officially opened its doors. The grand opening ceremony was a dazzling affair, attended by hundreds of guests, from journalists and wine collectors to curious tourists. The restaurant, which I named the Speakeasy, served exquisite gourmet dishes paired with modern wines. But its undeniable centerpiece was a stunning display counter showcasing a few of the most remarkable bottles from my treasure, each one housed in an illuminated glass case like a priceless jewel. The boutique hotel, with its 50 exquisitely designed rooms, embraced a modern desert aesthetic, with each room featuring subtle decorative details that evoked the Prohibition era. The Canyon Oasis Casino was the true highlight, with custom-designed poker tables and slot machines that resembled secret Prohibition-era speakeasies, attracting both tourists and locals in droves. Canyon Oasis quickly became a renowned destination in Arizona. Magazine articles hailed it as the new jewel of the desert, and tourists flocked to the complex to take photos with the iconic Canyon Oasis sign, to hear the incredible story of the hidden wine collection, and to experience the unique, immersive atmosphere that I had so carefully crafted. I hired a team of top-tier professionals, from a Michelin-starred chef to a seasoned casino manager. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just like an entrepreneur, but like a true leader. My life had turned a new, brilliant page. I no longer lived in that cramped, depressing apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix. I bought a spacious, beautiful house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a stunning view of the desert, where I could sit on the porch every evening and watch the distant twinkling lights of Canyon Oasis. I no longer woke up with that familiar paralyzing fear of failure, no longer haunted by the memory of my father's disappointed stare or Julian and Isabel's cruel mockery. I had finally found a sense of peace within myself, not because of the money or the fame, but because I had finally proven my own worth. Not to my family, but to myself. Canyon Oasis was so much more than just an entertainment complex. It was a testament to perseverance, to faith, and to the ability to see immense value in something that others had completely overlooked. I still maintained contact with my family, but it was minimal. I had forgiven them, but I would never forget the scars they had left behind. My father remained deeply displeased that I had chosen to partner with Arizona Ascend, but there was nothing he could do but watch my success from a distance. And I, Leo Vance, was no longer the failure of the family. I was the one who had transformed an abandoned gas station into a celebrated icon, and I was going to continue building my dream one brick at a time. That is the story of my life, a journey from being called the shame of the Vance lineage, a perpetual failure with a long trail of shattered dreams, to becoming the man who built Canyon Oasis, a dazzling entertainment complex in the heart of the Arizona desert, a symbol of perseverance and an unwavering belief in oneself. And if you were to ask me for a piece of advice, I would tell you this: never ever let the doubts or the mockery of others define who you are. The greatest opportunities often come from the most unexpected and overlooked places, like a derelict gas station or a dusty, forgotten cellar. Believe in yourself. Have the courage to seize those chances when they appear, and do not be afraid to fail, because sometimes it is those very failures that ultimately lead you to the greatest treasure of your life. Just keep pushing forward, and I truly believe that you will find your own success on the path you have chosen.